Our story actually begins in ancient Greece, many eons ago.
All of these black people, poor people, barefoot people are there. It's like, no, we have to clean this. And they always wanted to clean, but now they have a purpose, they have a deadline to do this.
Hosting is expensive. Every game in the last 50 years has gone over budget. The 2014 Sochi Winter Games went over its $10 billion budget by an additional $41 billion.
Tokyo's 2020 Olympics are already the most expensive summer games ever. And that's before the games have even taken place.
Sounds like a good time to ask if the Olympics are a predictor of economic downturn.
Let's just get on with the show.
Propaganda is ubiquitous and everyone uses propaganda. It's a kind of communication that makes a case for a goal bypassing reason. So what it does is it's a method to urge you to mobilize towards something while concealing from you things that you reasonably should think.
Okay, so today's episode is on the Olympics, the dark side of the Olympics. What is the truth behind hosting the Olympics? What's the truth behind being an Olympiad? What does it take for a city to host the Olympics? Is it a big propaganda tool used as a way to market yourself as a new global city, an emerging global city, or a staple power that is flexing its muscles? Is it a way of reimbursing the area, renovating the area? Or is it all one big lie? We're going to discover that. We're going to unpack that today. But before we get into that, I'm going to need you to do me one little favor, and that's please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this episode in order for it to grow. And I do need it to grow. I'm going to need your support. I'm going to need your help. I'm going to need your engagement. So please help a brother out, and I'll keep helping by making better and better shows. Put into the comments what you want to see next. Without further ado though, let's get into it.
Regardless what language you speak, what country you're from, or how old you are, you probably know what this symbol is. The Olympics is the largest, most global, highest standard for athleticism.
It's not going to be easy to go to a model that makes environmental sense and economic sense, but I do think it makes sense to talk about it and put it out there as someplace that we should be heading.
Depending on how the next few Olympics go, it might be the only direction left.
Could we be watching the death of the Olympics?
So I want to start off with the truth. What brought about this episode? And it was the announcement or the news breaking that Paris were removing homeless people from their grounds in the wake of the Olympics, as it's on the brink of happening. As of recording, it may have already started, or it potentially may have just about to start, depending on when this drops, And it brought to mind many interesting thoughts. What does it take to host an Olympics? Are the cities that host the Olympics covering themselves and washing themselves and trying to absolve themselves of the horrors and the lies in which it brought this games to light? And it made me explore the history of the Olympics. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole history of it, but the Olympics started in ancient Greek and was eventually stopped by one of the Christian empires who saw it as a pagan celebration brought back by the Frenchmen.
A man by the name Pierre de Coubertin came along. He was a Frenchman who really loved sportsmanship, and he believed in the spirit of the Olympics, in the sense of pure sportsmanship and working to become our best. He laid this out in what later became the Olympic Creed, which reads, "The important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. The essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well." So with this idealized image of what the Olympics could be, Coubertin set out to create the International Olympic Committee. And this was founded in 1894, and then only 2 years later, the first ever modern Olympic Games was held. The 1896 Olympics were held in the Pan-Athenic Stadium in Athens, Greece. It's a stadium that's built entirely of marble, and it was built actually 6th century BC. So there really wasn't a better place to revive the Olympics than right there in Athens. Then it was in 1912 that Coubertin designed the Olympic rings that we know and love today. Each ring is supposed to symbolize an inhabited continent, the Americas counting as one for some reason. And the colors are chosen because at the time, every flag in the world had at least one color represented in the rings. So it really was supposed to be this message of world unity and everyone coming together to better themselves through sportsmanship.
Brought back, and it was supposed to represent this quote, Citras, altras, fortras. Faster, stronger, higher. I think it's faster, higher, stronger. Supposed to be a unifying moment, exhibiting and eliciting strong emotions, strong feelings of catharsis, escapism, but also inspirational, motivational. We understand the world through stories, through tales. And the Olympics being the biggest sporting activity that the world has ever seen brings that to the surface. However, being the biggest sporting activity that the world has ever seen, it mirrors and reflects what's going on in the world. Being a propaganda tool for Nazi Germany in the 1930s, also being a symbol of strength and triumph for Tokyo, Japan, post Hiroshima in 1964. The Olympics has shared and mirrored many moments in society. But what do these specific Olympic Games mirror and show us about society today?
In this McDonald's, several employees are flipping burgers and asking if you want fries with that. Who do you think makes more money, the athlete or the McDonald's worker? Remember, these athletes are filling stadiums, creating a spectacle that the whole world wants to see and that generates billions of sponsorship money. And yet, it's the McDonald's worker that earns almost 50% more than the average athlete. The International Olympic Committee gives absolutely no money to Olympians, even if they win gold. But why not?
That money could ensure that our US Olympic team are treated equally to their level of achievement, are treated to a salary that is appropriate for them representing this country.
Across America, athletes are facing a decision. Is it all worth it?
27 times over, yes, yes, and yes. Even if it was half the income, I don't think that I would regret for one moment having participated in sport.
I get to play the sport I love every single day. That's wealth. That's being rich. But I wouldn't be upset if in the future we were able to make some more money and not necessarily have to have two jobs.
It kind of puts a chip on my shoulder to go even harder to compete at the best and compete with the best, so that I can take myself out of this position.
That's my only question of the next 3 years of, do I continue another 3 years of being broke?
I think for one point is the exploitation of labor and workers. Now, I know traditionally you don't look at athletes as laborers and workers, but they are the commodity that is being commodified by the Olympics. And rarely are they paid. Many may tell the tales of Usain Bolt, Shelley-Ann Fraser, Michael Phelps, and all these notable Olympiads, but there are also Olympiads that have not been paid, struggle to get by, struggle to make money post winning things at the Olympics. On top of that, it's important to say about the Olympians that are made that are highly profitable, highly net worth individuals, is that they are the exception, not the rule. They're also in marquee sports that attract the attention and endorsements. And many capitalistic people may say that, those who are not in marquee sports, those who are in sports that requires them to work harder in the marketing side, they need to get on their saddle and work hard. And I would turn and say, when you look at what the Olympics themselves are making and profiting, for there to be Olympiads, Olympic gold medalists struggling to get by, struggling for funding, struggling to get any sort of endorsement from this sport, that is an Olympic sport that they're participating in, is a great tale and a great fail on this Olympic Games. And it's not just the Paris Olympic Games or the Beijing Olympic Games. It happens throughout society. But I wouldn't have done this episode if it was just this point. There's also...
In the 90s, for instance, it took 4% of revenue. Compare that with the 70% it pocketed from the 2016 Rio Games. The newly built stadia can cost up to $30 million a year to maintain, and they're often on valuable real estate. Most cities don't even know what to use them for after the games. Those facilities fall into decay if they're not kept up, and that hurts property value.
77,200 people have been removed from their homes in Rio de Janeiro since 2009. That's according to government data. And much of this is to make way for infrastructure and real estate projects associated with the World Cup and the Olympic Games.
So it's kind of a shame because the Olympics ends up coming in and kind of whitewashing areas and creating and reframing them. And, you know, you lose a lot of the personality of the city.
But in the end, billions of public dollars that were supposed to benefit the people ended up bowing to the interests of a few people with a lot of money. And instead of investing in the underserved, Rio will once again hide them from view.
The lies of reimbursement, the lies that the cities will be better, the lies.
Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park is fully reopened. It will attract, we estimate, 9 million visitors a year. It will become one of the top 10 must-see sites in London, with the greatest sporting facilities in the country, the best connected railway hub in the UK, 9 lines going into Stratford, including the Channel Tunnel rail link. We will create, in addition to the 2,818 new homes in the village, 1,397 of which are already full, we will create a further 5 new neighbourhoods over the next 20 years.
The facilities that the governments are pumping money into will be used to improve the cities at large. You can see from the Rio Olympics. That wasn't the case. Those are abandoned. Those look like horror scenes as opposed to former staples and glory moments of the city. Too often this happens, and I can attest to what happened in London. Many of the Olympic grounds, Olympic stadiums, Olympic parks are abandoned. They are not taken care of. They're not maintained. The promise was never lived up to. Now, it's difficult to find a counterpoint as to why this happens. Many may say this is just a byproduct of overspending. And I would turn and say, why are you overspending so much?
While many of the venues here are used regularly, recent reports suggest that a successful Olympic legacy in London is threatened by a serious shortfall in revenue. A report published in 2021 suggested that the general financial outlook of the park is a ticking time bomb. In 2020, trading revenue across the park fell by 30% due to the restrictions caused by the pandemic. However, the cancellation of showpiece events because of the lockdown also helped save the city's taxpayers £7.4 million, largely due to the high costs of running events at the London Stadium.
There are many ways to look at this and understand that sometimes it may be impossible to maintain. Maybe the promise was an overpromise. However, when you couple that with the overspending in particular areas and cities that need spending in terms of social housing, improving education, improving welfare states, improving the structures that help the city run. Too often that doesn't happen, but to see that the money's spent on these sort of vanity projects, these sort of propaganda pieces, you begin to ask yourself, what is the Olympics really about? What is hosting the Olympics really about if it doesn't affect and help the people that live in the city? This quote that I saw from Vox.
They think of the city as a place for you to invest in, not a place for you to live in.
That too often they are cities for investment, but not cities for living in. For that to be the historical legacy of hosting an Olympics is quite disturbing. And if you take London, for example, where I'm from, you go on YouTube, you find so many different videos, so many different pieces. You can find it on news articles as well, blog pieces that discuss how London has reached a place in which is unlivable. London's supposed to be one of the biggest cities in the world, one of the most metropolitan, financially profitable cities in the world. So what does that tell you what's really going on in society? Rio de Janeiro as well, Tokyo's overspending, Beijing's overspending. What is happening in Sochi in Russia after their Winter Olympics tells you a lot. I know some of that has its own context in terms of Russia going into war, in terms of London leaving leaving the European Union, which was caused from Brexit, may be the context, but you're noticing these driving forces and this causational reality that happens with hosting the Olympics. And how do you find the money for the Olympics? However, but the people that live in these cities are struggling the most. But that isn't the only point that I discovered on my tales of what happens when you really host the Olympics.
The idea there is good, like to keep everyone safe. I would respect that, but the whole fact that without any reason, like you look suspicious, so I have to remove you from the whole borough, that's a bit extreme.
Olympics is only happening now, and we've been hanging around there for time. We're happy that tourists are coming, and they have the right to be here, but we also have our rights to hang around with friends and have fun.
We should have a right to be around where we live and hang around our area.
Do Londoners feel safer when they're walking through the streets and they suddenly find armed police with big guns? I mean, not in a country that rather prides itself in having an unarmed police force. However, we are already the most surveyed society. We've now got drones coming in over the sky. You hear the sounds of military helicopters. Do we really want to be living in a kind of Ridley Scott wet dream?
Well, starting from tomorrow, there's going to be armed police at my door, 10 soldiers stationed 24/7 at the end of the corridor, and a battery of missiles on the roof of the water tower above my apartment.
See, an article from Jacqueline Kennedy coins the term spectacle of security. So this is the idea of control, complete control, without actually looking like you're over-militarized. And why is that important? What is the importance of that? Is that it shows you the mind control that comes under when you're trying to police particular areas. You've got to think of the influx of tourists, the influx of attention. The need for control is important. And often the cities that they're hosting do have particularly high crime rates, if not world-round, Europe-wise, perhaps geographically in their own countries. You have demographics of people, particularly ethnic minorities, discussing the over-policing that goes on. Again, I can attest to this in London in 2010, 2011 and 2012. The amount of times I was searched, sometimes because I was in the wrong area, if I'm being honest, doing the wrong thing, sometimes just passing through, was obscene. I can tell you in those 3 years, it was definitely double digits.
Without a doubt. We need to do it. And anybody in the black community or the ethnic minority community who says we don't need to do stop and search, they're a fool amongst themselves, right? But it's not the stop and search which is the problem. It's going to be the way it's conducted.
Get out of the car! Get out of the car now! Get detained, section 1, get out of the car! PC Franks, local 8, get out of the car! Get out of the car!
Detain him.
Detain section 1, please.
Go through it all. Go through it all. Get out of the car.
Go through it all. Go through it all.
Give him.
PC Franks, local lane police station.
What reason? What did I do? Bruv, I'm at home, bro. Relax. What are you doing? Bruv, I'm at home, bro. Relax, bro. Stop taking that. Bro,
Embarrassing. It's one of the most embarrassing things that you can go through, but it is also intimidating because it's the easiest way for a black man to go to jail. And you can go to jail for something they didn't even stop you for in the first place.
It seems to be the same in Beijing, in Rio, and it seems to work as a way of sort of whitewashing, cleansing, purifying the area, and it starts to make you think Is this a form of totalitarianism? Is this a form of a dystopian society appearing to be in control, appearing to seem to be in control, appearing to be a unified state? While this spectacle goes on, it gives you visions and ideas of Squid Games to a degree, Hunger Games to another degree. It gives you those ideas because why are you so in the need of creating oppressive control while trying to not look like you have oppressive control? The militarization of the police in London in particular was extreme. And when you look at the hypocrisy that goes on in there with the use and the hiring of G4S, which at the time was supporting Israel.
G4S, you got hyped. We charge you with apartheid. G4S, you got hyped. We charge you with apartheid.
There's lots of lovely things said about the Olympics, but if you're hiring a company to provide the security that's involved in supporting Israeli apartheid, it's involved in exploiting prisoners in the UK, it's killed asylum seekers and immigrants in the UK, then I think that's really undermining the message of the Olympics.
In the case of Jimmy Mubinga, the officers deporting him pushed his head down, kept him in a position where he asphyxiated, and G4S claimed that they'd done nothing wrong, but even their own employees came forward saying that they were doing this all the time. It's very...
At that time, that was a black mark. If that was to happen today, that would be an abomination and a call for a boycott. Whether a boycott would actually happen, I don't know if I could promise that. However, it goes to show you that there seems to be no morality, no causal ethical stance that these governments take in order to get things over the line. They seem to bend and move the goalposts in which where they will. And it's shameful and it's worrying that these are host cities. These are supposed to be the greatest cities on earth in which they happen.
In 2014, Russia hosted the 22nd Winter Olympic Games in Sochi. The country had emerged from its Soviet-era shadow and had overcome the economic shock therapy of the 1990s to become an increasingly wealthy and well-integrated global economy. The country still had its controversies, but this was going to be an opportunity for it to show off its success on the world stage through the unifying power of sportsmanship. Unfortunately, just 4 days after the Games' closing ceremonies, Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula, kicking off a slow but steady regression from one of the fastest growing major economies in the world into what it is today, which is a petro-state crippled by intense global sanctions and an expensive ongoing conflict. Then there is China. In 2022, it hosted the Winter Olympic Games at the same time as its economy was recording the first year of stagnant economic growth since opening up to global trade and private industry in the 1980s. This marked the end of the single most intense period of economic growth in human history. Many economists predict that China's rapid growth and plateau have many of the same characteristics as Japan in the 1980s and 1990s, when it became the global manufacturing hub before its own real estate market bubble popped, its workers became less globally competitive, and the ageing population became a national burden. One of the other less obvious similarities is that Japan hosted the 1998 Winter Olympics at the same time as its economy was dealing with the Asian financial crisis, a downturn that now, almost 3 decades later, it hasn't recovered from. Looking further back in history, there were of course the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, which, well, obviously had their problems. Later this month, the French Olympics are going to be held at the same time as the heightened tensions in the country over a stagnating economy and quality of life sacrifices that are coming because of it.
And this links to the potential cause of economic downfall that follows all these cities. I did mention this earlier, and I don't know whether it's causal or correlation. The video from Economics Explains, and I want to add this here, Economics Explains is one of the best YouTube channels on the internet that discusses economics basics and puts these complex issues into basic forums. Does have his own opinions and does share his own opinions, but for the most part is an amazing YouTube channel. Go follow it, go subscribe to it if you haven't already. It's great if you're into economics. However, he goes into details about the economic downturn of the Olympics and the Olympic host cities that follow them. Is it causal? Is it correlation? Again, like I said before, I don't know. But you do notice that Athens in 2004, economic downturn. Again, there were some other contextual reasons why. You have Beijing, which was an emerging superpower at the time, but once you reach the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, later in the decade, you find that they went through economic downturn. And again, mass overspending in all these Olympics. You have the London Olympics, which soon followed a regression economically. Again, there's the context of Brexit, there's the context of a COVID pandemic. Do these things Is it a correlation? Is it direct? Is it just exacerbating it? Difficult to say, but what I will say is it definitely does exacerbate the issue. It definitely does highlight some of the issues that happen in these major cities. And another thing I will say is the attention, the finances that are poured into the city exacerbate this issue that were already there.
The Olympics is a spectacle that is often more costly than it is profitable. This is a measurable fact. However, there's still the argument that Olympic advocates make about the PR game that is, if nothing else, a way to put your country on the map for spectators to see what you can do. The problem is, exposure isn't always a good thing. Making the choice to embrace the spotlight reveals everything, the bad as much as the good. The social backlash following the Rio Games, with the troubling contrast between the slums and the stadiums, was a total disaster. And the Sochi Games brought a lot of attention to Russia right as it was about to invade its neighbour. The 2022 Games in China also coincided with issues like re-education camps, strict lockdowns, and the protests in Hong Kong. Many of these countries with questionable models for governance buy the Olympic media bundle with the expectation that the world will see them as a shining example of economic triumph with a lasting progressive legacy. However, these cases show that winning the expensive bid often does quite the opposite. These kinds of soft power manoeuvres can have a real impact on global perceptions and influence over things like foreign investment, tourism, and even trade deals or sanctions. Is the Olympics some kind of curse, or is it just coincidental that countries that host it often deal with a crisis during or after the event's arrival? Are these multi-billion-dollar vanity projects really worth it? This might be a tricky question to answer, but based on all the evidence, there appears to be a pattern worth mentioning. Of course, there are plenty of countries that have hosted the Games where nothing went wrong apart from maybe some government overspending. But if there are bad things bubbling away under the surface, the upfront cost and critical international recognition is only going to make bad things even worse.
So I never want to say that hosting the Olympics causes it, and that's not what that video is saying, but it does exacerbate already prolonged and long-term issues. In the case of Paris, where they had a homeless issue, they have other cultural issues that they're dealing with, a cultural war themselves, which is just being exacerbated by the presence of the Olympics, the eyes and the global attention of the world. It is, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest sporting event that the world has ever seen. But it feels dystopian the way governments go to hide it.
Everyone uses propaganda. It's a kind of communication that makes a case for a goal bypassing reason. So what it does is it's a method to urge you to mobilize towards something while concealing from you things that you reasonably should consider.
It comes back to the first question I asked when I did this episode. Is hosting the Olympics a form of sporting excellence and trying to exhibit that sporting excellence? Is it a vanity project? Is it a way for potential politicians, bureaucrats to gain favor by the public? You truly never know the intentions. You can only look at the results and the relationships that happen. Many people complaining about gentrification, whether that's in London, whether that's in Rio. Economic downturns following the cities, the Olympic Committee seem to have no issue working with hostile and difficult nations, whether that be Russia and Sochi, who soon followed a war, whether that be China. Again, I understand they are a global power and we all need to get in touch with that. But you see this mirror itself in the FIFA World Cup as well.
And this goes for other major globalised athletic events as well, like Qatar's controversial Football World Cup. Choosing a country smaller than the state of Connecticut came as a surprise to most of the FIFA fan base for a number of reasons. They weren't equipped to handle such a massive sporting event, and their presence on the world stage was largely unknown at the time. Rumours of alleged bribery began circulating through both Western and Eastern media. Moreover, the small country with a notoriously hot climate inhospitable to players actually had to build a new city just to meet the requirements to hold the games, with hotels, underground transportation, stadiums, railways, ports and airports. Most reports indicate that this alone cost $6.5 billion, with total infrastructure investments estimated to be $300 billion. Which might sound like a lot, but it's a lot cheaper than it would have been if they needed to pay their workers. These huge construction projects required a lot of manpower, which Qatar received from places like India, Bangladesh and Nepal. This is where things got a bit shady. To secure a contract to work on Qatar's World Cup construction project, most of these people had to go into considerable debt. These workers from mostly poor countries had to pay up front to labour hire agencies to travel to Qatar, all for the right to work in terrible and hazardous conditions. As a result, labourers were thrown into precarious positions commonly referred to as kafala or sponsorship, basically a euphemistic way of saying indentured servitude, where agencies force workers to slave away in 51 degrees Celsius or 125 Fahrenheit heat for lower rates than they were originally promised. Now, Qatar didn't host the Olympic Games, however, the desire to be in the spotlight had exactly the same effect of drawing attention to the country's horrendous human rights abuses. Something that most people around the world would have been blissfully unaware of, if not for the attention of this global sporting event.
They were so far behind in terms of a nation ready to host a World Cup that they had to build a city. There was the potential human rights violations that went on in order for the World Cup to happen. And that's not to talk about the human rights violations that happened in other Olympic Games when you compare that to what happened to Qatar. And there was, again, to mention what happened in Qatar with the World Cup as well, is that they had issues with corruption and bribery and it never stopped it. So again, I ask you the question, what is propaganda? What is the importance of this? Beijing being an emerging power, was it important for them to host the game to solidify their name on the world stage? Is it important for London to re-solidify its name? Is it important for Paris, in this example, to solidify its name? If you look at the mass overspending that happened in Tokyo, was that important as well for it to solidify its name? The way these cities go around to hide not only the overspending in the case of Tokyo, the gentrification and over-policing that happened in London in the Rio Olympics, the poor maintenance of the stadiums that happened in Rio, that happened in Beijing, that happened in Tokyo too. It makes you ask the question, what is the price of propaganda? And what are they trying to cover up? Are we in an illusion and are we living in a totalitarian government? And these once cathartic, escapist, unifying moments are now commodified by the tentacles of capitalism to distract us from the reality in which we live in. It's a question, it's not an answer. I do not have an answer. It's not even a statement. It's just a question. It brings me to the ultimate question. What maybe some of you may be asking yourself, is the Olympics itself a bad thing? Nope. Not really. Not really. The feelings of catharsis, escapism, togetherness, love, motivation, inspiration are all real. I think the problem is the society that we live in now commodifies everything pure. The tentacles of capitalism have reached out of control. Corporatist capitalism, I should say, has got to a place where everything is commodified. The athletes themselves barely make enough profit at large. It's only the few elites that profit from it. It brings me back to the statement said in that Vox video.
They think of the city as a place for you to invest in, not a place for you to live in.
And when you have that at that heart of what hosting the Olympics is, you do see that there's need for drastic change in how in which we approach hosting a city, hosting a Olympic Games. The Olympic Committee themselves profit large from this, but the host cities themselves not, unless you take out the unquantifiable number of propaganda, which I think is what drives this. Also the ego boosts of some of these world leaders, and they do have ego. So I hope you enjoy the Olympic Games. I hope you bask in the opening and closing ceremony glory, because it is that. However, I hope you remember behind it that this seems to become more and more a vision of dystopian totalitarian governments trying to mask its control or loss of control through these spectacles. And we keep a more critical eye on why they're becoming bigger and bigger spectacles and why there's such a need to hide the truth of what is going on in these cities. In fact, there should be moments to exhibit the truth. In the 1986 Olympics, the black athletes that won their race used that moment as protest. Jesse Owens used his moment as a protest. And I think we should use the Olympics, if anyone gets the opportunity, any Olympiad gets the opportunity, should use that moment for protest. The Olympics itself is not bad, but the commodification is. And with that, I give you my dues. I say goodbye, and I'll see you next week. Peace.
And who'd have thought? Oh, was the gladiator, Hercules, who stayed
free.